Thank you, Clara, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you virtually tonight for this webinar. And it also, I can't believe how fast this year is flying by as we're in the middle of October, as it's already getting dark very early at 6 p.m. But yeah, for those who are here tonight and aren't necessarily familiar with the Cooper Square Committee, Cooper Square Committee is actually the oldest anti-displacement housing rights community organization. And my name is Alex Lee. For those who don't know me, I'm the Resiliency Coordinator and Housing Organizer. And the Lower East Side is actually Cooper Square Committee's catchment area. We do a lot of organizing. And not only do we work with tenants associations, but we also do a number of things, including helping small businesses. And actually one of the areas that I focus on is a program that Cooper Square has had for now about almost 10 years. And that is our HDFC greening project, which actually is sometimes also in the past been referred to as Cooper Square Committee's HDFC Green and Resilient Program. And the bulk of what I do, the majority of it, is really helping a lot of the HDFCs in the Lower East Side, the greater Lower East Side, which also consists of what people refer to as the East Village, Alphabet City, as far north as 14th Street, or as far west as the Bowery, or as far south as the Canal Street. Actually, this area, for those who aren't too familiar with HDFCs, later on in this presentation, you'll be given a little bit more of a background, but a lot of these buildings are, some of them are rentals, but many of them are actually co-ops that were created, or rather formed, back in the late 70s, early 80s, early 90s. And to this day, actually, the Lower East Side of Manhattan has one of the highest concentrations, highest densities of these buildings. There's actually close to, I believe, almost 150. And actually, a lot of these buildings are, in fact, in a situation where there was a lot of major extreme weather, such as hurricanes that took place. One of them was actually, we're about a week away from, unfortunately, remembering its 8th anniversary, Hurricane Sandy. And the situation around the area is that a lot of these buildings are, HDFCs are actually east of Avenue B and are very close to the East River. And there was lots and lots of flooding that took place after some of these major hurricanes. And it's really a challenge because a lot of these buildings are very old housing stock. Many of them don't even have elevators. And on average, most of these buildings were built in the early 1900s. So it's a challenge. A lot of these buildings had flooding after Hurricane Sandy and lost power for as long as 10 days. So really, what's so great about HDFCs is they provide, it's a model of home ownership and permanent affordable housing for many people who couldn't necessarily, because of their income status, be able to become homeowners. So it's essentially a great model. And even those who are tenants who live in HDFCs, they have a lot of protections that are needed in such an expensive city like New York. And that, you know, Cooper Square Committee's mission is to preserve, help preserve, and do a lot of organizing work to preserve affordable housing. So with all of that in mind, today we're going to be talking more about examples where the community of the Lower East Side and across the city has been able to organize against anti-displacement, but also around environmental issues. And just to give you a little bit more info, on the Cooper Square, we work with area residents to contribute to the preservation and development of affordable, environmentally healthy housing and community cultural spaces so that the Lower East Side, otherwise known as the LES, remains racially, economically, and culturally diverse. And as I mentioned before, the HDFC Greening project, we assist the LES HDFC community to preserve their healthy reserve funds through sustainability and resiliency efforts. And a lot of these buildings, as I mentioned before, they have maintenance that is relatively affordable for the vast majority of its residents. And so we hope that over the years to come that a lot of those monthly maintenance that they pay doesn't increase, and that those families can remain to keep up and not feel like they're getting pushed out. And also, as I mentioned, yeah, well over 60% of HDFCs in the LES are actually in a major high-risk flood zone. And not only are they in a high-risk flood zone, but they're also in a major evacuation zone. And we're actually impacted by Superstorm Sandy. So one of the things is training and helping a lot of these co-op boards, whether it's a self-managed HDFC or it's managed by an outside property management. We want to make sure that those people who are running the building are better prepared, better equipped, so that the next time a natural disaster comes around, they are in a better place and there's less concern. Also, while doing that, we try to find cost-effective solutions and affordable programs to help them significantly lower the HDFC's electric bills, other utility bills, water bills, heating costs, as well as keeping the apartments and the building itself warmer during the winter months and cooler during the summer months. There's actually more of an umbrella term to describe that, and it's weatherizing a building. And there's a lot, because these are very old buildings. So it's easy to see a situation where like hot air is leaving, too much warm heat is coming out, seeping out of a building in the winter months when it should be insulated. Whereas in the summer, when somebody's running their AC all day long, because there's cracks and because there's areas where there's not enough insulation, all of that cool air that might be coming out of somebody's AC is actually leaving the building. So warm air is coming in and it's not good. But so it's a waste of energy and resources. So not only do these improvements, as I mentioned, help your building in terms of becoming more energy efficient and also resilient, they also help lower and moderate income families, as I mentioned before, remain in place, and they're able to afford their monthly maintenance. So moving on, I just wanted to show you an example of just how badly of the Lower East Side, which is actually these 4 images right here, show you flooding that took place around the corner of 9th Street and Avenue C in the Lower East Side. And as you can see, there was some very bad flooding, and little did we know something like this, so catastrophic, was so problematic to the community, was going to happen. But in what I believe was only several hours, torrential rain, and just a situation where there wasn't enough proper drainage in the streets and infrastructure that could keep up with all of this extreme weather, as you can see, had horrible post-catastrophic impact. So as you can see here, this is a memory from about 8 years ago that a lot of people will have instilled in their mind for a very long time. And also, as I mentioned before, not only is the LES in a major flood zone, much of Alphabet City east of Avenue B, but also, as you can see from this image right here, it's a major evacuation zone. As you can see, some of the shaded purplish color along the East River, just north of the Williamsburg Bridge. If anybody's familiar, they can see in this image here areas of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and a tiny piece of Queens to the right. So as you can see, a lot of the Lower East Side is a very vulnerable area where there was lots of flooding, and people are at high risk, and that's why buildings need to be better prepared next time around when there's major extreme weather. And one of those things, or one of those important areas of energy efficiency, but also resiliency, is what we'd like to see is more and more opportunities where people can, buildings can learn more about the benefits of solar energy, solar power, and opportunities to rely less on, or rather depend less on the grid. And when I say the grid, I'm referring to like the electrical grid that is mostly connected through power lines and actually is derived or is coming from, most of your energy is coming from like power plants. But what we want to see is we want to see society move away from fossil fuels and depend more on natural combination of just renewable natural sources of energy that do not contribute to pollution. So as you can see, this very large solar panel array is a way to hopefully inspire others to consider solar. And there's all kinds of opportunities here, and you'll learn more about community solar for those who aren't aware later on in this presentation. And so I just hope that, you know, starting from now and past to the present, more and more people take opportunities to go solar and learn more about it very seriously. And yes, now I'd like to reintroduce, you spoke a little earlier, Clara Weinstein from UHAB, who's going to be otherwise known as the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board. Clara is going to talk a little bit about partnership she has with Solar One's Here Comes Solar initiative and their co-op's Go Solar campaign. I'll pass it on now to Clara.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. And thanks for talking to us about the work that Cooper Square Committee does. It's really important to ground ourselves in the specific environmental burdens like flood risk and evacuation risk that this neighborhood faces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Co-ops Go Solar, which is a collaboration between UHAB and Here Comes Solar from Solar One. So our campaign focuses exclusively on HDFC co-ops. So I just want to define that really quick in case anyone doesn't know. HDFCs are a form of resident-controlled, cooperatively owned, and permanently affordable housing. So what that means is there's no landlord. Instead, there are residents or shareholders who democratically elect a board that's a volunteer board that makes decisions about the building's energy use and other building decisions. So Co-ops Go Solar is the first solar campaign to focus exclusively on HDFCs. Our goals are to heighten awareness of renewable energy in the HDFC community and really make it more accessible, help HDFCs become more energy efficient, and sustain affordable HDFCs into the future. So we do this through a combination of free technical assistance, working directly with solar installers. We want to make this process as simple and easy for shareholders as possible. Trying to figure it out on your own and deal with permits, incentives, construction can get really confusing. So we're there to kind of manage things and make it simple. And we're also here to build a network of educated and empowered shareholders because we know that HDFC shareholders are their own best solution and their own experts in their own housing. So why are we talking about solar? There's two main reasons, and that's high energy costs and health impacts. So households that spend over 6% of their income on energy costs are considered energy burdened. And that affects Black and Latinx households the most. They have the highest rates of energy burden nationwide at almost every point in the income distribution. And you can see on the map in the left is a map of energy burden throughout the US. So it's pretty high in the Northeast. So reducing energy burden is really a way to keep affordable housing affordable. No one should have to choose between paying their rent, paying their utilities, or buying groceries. Another reason is health impact. So solar panels can indirectly contribute to better air quality. That's because they reduce reliance on peaker plants, which are the dirtiest polluting power plants in the city. They turn on during peak hours, and they're mostly located in low-income neighborhoods. So better air quality reduces respiratory illnesses like asthma, which is especially important in the context of COVID, because over the past few months, we've seen a correlation between air pollution and COVID. A recent study found that a small increase in long-term air exposure to air pollution leads to a large increase in the COVID-19 death rate, which is a problem, especially because low-income neighborhoods oftentimes have the worst air quality. So reducing carbon emissions and working for better air quality is really a way to stand up for all New Yorkers, especially the elderly, children, and the immunocompromised. And on the right, you can see a map of COVID case rates from April. And you'll notice that communities of color, like the Bronx and Central Queens, are experiencing the highest rates of COVID. So this really is a racial justice issue. So there's a really long tradition of innovation when it comes to energy in the HDFC community, which you can see when you notice that the first building to get renewable energy in New York City was actually an HDFC in the Lower East Side. So it's Hartstone HDFC on 11th Street. They had solar hot water heaters and a windmill. And because of them, net metering is actually possible in New York City today. So they have a really big legacy. And it makes sense when you think about HDFC shareholders as controlling their own housing. It's a pretty natural jump to wanting to control your own energy as well. So, so far about 28 co-ops have signed up. You can see on the map in the left, there's a cluster in the Lower East Side, a bunch in Upper Manhattan, and some in the Bronx and Brooklyn as well. They're projected to save over $5 million over the panel's lifetime, and they're benefiting 970 families. So none of this would be possible without our technical assistance partner, Solar One. They're an environmental education nonprofit. They do workforce training, green education, and they help buildings get solar. So the reason why they do that is because solar has become a lot more affordable in recent decades, but New Yorkers still face a lot of barriers. So some of those barriers are all the red tape around construction in New York City, the fact that systems for multifamily buildings tend to be more complex in a dense urban environment, and the fact that affordable housing often needs additional assistance with things like financing. So the Here Comes Solar process, and keep in mind this is all completely free for HDFCs, starts out with a free site assessment and estimate. They educate and build knowledge within the building, help with financing and incentives, help you look for a loan if you need one, help you find an installer, and make sure everything runs smoothly during installation. So when we talk about the cost savings of solar, this is really what we mean if you take a look at this 25-year cash flow. So this excludes incentives, and with incentives, the picture is even better because incentives make it so that you only have to pay for a small fraction of the system. But panels tend to pay for themselves in about 4 to 8 years. And then from that point on, they're generating savings for your building through savings on your electric bill. So solar has so many benefits. It adds value to the building, it keeps down costs, which makes it a more stable place to live for residents. They're long-term continuous savings. The panels are warranted for 25 years at least. So you know it's something that you can depend on. It's a point of pride and a way to engage residents. And it's a way to really make a plan for the future of your HDFC. So what can you do now if this all sounds good to you? You can attend a training, which you're all already doing. There's another one coming up later in October about planning energy projects. So if you're interested in solar, I would definitely recommend attending that one. And feel free to drop in the chat if you're interested in attending, and we can get you registered. You can also talk to your neighbors about solar and see how they feel. You can also explore other energy efficiency options for your co-op. There's so much that you can do in addition to solar. You can optimize your heating system, you can upgrade your lighting, and at UHub, we're happy to talk to you about any of that and help you figure out what incentives you might be eligible for or how you might finance that work. So if you're interested in energy efficiency, please drop it in the chat. I'll put my contact information as well, so you can reach out to me. And if you are ready to get started in the solar process, you should send us a recent Con Edison bill, because that's all that we need to start making your estimate. The estimate is really the best way to figure out if solar is feasible for your specific building. It shows you what size system you could get, how much energy it might produce, how long it might take to pay for itself. So a lot of really good information. And again, all we need is a Con Edison bill. And finally, just stay connected with UHAB and Solar One. We're always really happy to answer questions. And yeah, reach out to us. We're happy to talk you through the process. So now we're going to hear a little bit from Valerio from this Land is Ours Community Land Trust. And I'll let him introduce himself. He's going to talk a little bit about his work.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to start a little bit of early history. I'm currently the project director for the This Land is Ours COT, but for many years was the executive director of the Cooper Square Committee. And just to give you a snippet of the Cooper Square Committee's history, it was organized back in 1959 in opposition to a slum clearance plan sponsored by Robert Moses, the so-called master builder, that would have demolished a large portion of the Lower East Side, going from Delancey Street to East 9th Street, from 1st to 3rd Avenue, displacing thousands of families, and which the proposed new housing would not have been affordable to some 93% of our population based on surveys that Cooper Square carried out. The Cooper Square Committee organized against the Moses Plan, and we actually defeated the Moses Plan, and we won adoption of an alternate plan for Cooper Square that was put together through community participation and input. And that plan called for the community, the residents, to be the beneficiaries and not the victims of urban renewal, as is often the case. It also called for tenants to be allowed to remain in occupancy until development was imminent, because between the time a site is designated and the site is actually developed, a number of years can pass. So the plan was adopted by the city. A number of buildings were acquired on the eminent domain, but then for a long period of time, nothing happened, because we're talking now about the mid-70s, when the city and then the state were faced with a fiscal crisis, and there was no money from the federal government. So we had to engage in a holding action against a policy that was being implemented by Roger Starr, the HDA commissioner, now was HPD, that basically said, in a time of fiscal crisis, we need to concentrate our financial resources in better off neighborhoods. You mentioned earlier a lot of these HDFCs that exist in the Lower East Side, and to that I would also add the gardens. And all those HDFCs and gardens were a product of Roger Starr's planned shrinkage. Landlords torched their buildings in order to collect insurance. People that couldn't be pushed out by urban renewal moved out of their own free will when their homes went up in flames. And then nothing happened for a number of years. Finally, we managed to defeat Roger Starr. And then in the 80s, we finally got some funding from the federal government, and 2 sites were developed of new construction by the Cooper Square Committee, one on Stanton Street and one on East 5th Street, one for families on Stanton and one for seniors on East 5th Street. But after that point, there was no more money for new construction. And our plan was based on new construction. And our plan was also called for keeping the housing completely occupied until development was imminent. So by the 1980s, vacancies were filled by homeless families, very poor families. So what to do? Well, the Cooper Square Committee then came together again with the community and worked on a revised plan for Cooper Square. The revised plan no longer consists of new construction, but renovation. One objection we had to the HDFC co-op model is that whether the city paid for the full rehab or a partial rehab, the ultimate outcome would be individual building co-op units of 15 to 20 apartments, where if the families were really low income, they could not afford the housing in the long term, because even if fully renovated, eventually you need a new roof, a new boiler, and the housing would become unaffordable. And the other problem we saw is the lack of full fulfillment of fiduciary responsibilities by HDFC boards, and also things like selling apartments under the table. So Cooper Square Committee and the community addressed the first issue, the affordability issue, by creating a mutual housing association, which basically took the idea of an HDFC co-op, but clustered together a lot of buildings. Ultimately, in the Cooper Square case, 21 buildings located throughout the neighborhood, East 3rd, East 4th Street, 2nd Avenue. By creating an economy of scale, we were able to purchase fuel, supplies, and services at a discounted rate. We were able to develop a common reserve fund. So when the time came to replace the boiler, the money didn't come from a single building. It came from all the buildings pooling some of their money together. And that dealt with the economy of scale issue. It didn't deal with the other issues, which is making sure that the HDFCs were properly run, and also to protect permanent affordability. And that's why we came up with the idea of a community land trust. The community land trust, when the properties are conveyed to the MHA HDFC, retains ownership of the land and leases it to the HDFC. And by doing so, it exercises, I think you can take the next slide, a governance role and a stewardship role. And of course, the COT is community controlled. It has representatives from the buildings and also representatives from community organizations and other professionals that keep an eye on the whole situation. And by doing so, we're able to ensure, nothing is absolutely guaranteed, long-term permanent affordability, which is the goal of the COT. The reason for that is when you do an HDFC, there's usually a regulatory agreement that lasts for like 40 years. And then, you know, there's no longer any restrictions. The ground lease between the COT and the MHA HDFC is for 99 years with option to renew. So it's a long-term stewardship role that the COT takes on. And it took a long time to renovate the buildings because they were fully occupied. But they're all now completely renovated and in good condition, and the housing is affordable to families at 30% of AMI or below, which is a very low level of affordability. The reason for that is there's no accrual on the co-ops. Whatever people pay to purchase their shares, which is usually $250, now raised to an astronomical $1,800, and that's all they get back. But what they get back instead is what we call social equity, which means they're able to afford a better education, travel, healthcare, or even start a new business by the money they save that doesn't have to go into the maintenance fee. Our focus, Cooper Square's focus, and the MHA's focus has been largely on anti-displacement, but we can't avoid dealing with the environment. And one fight that Cooper Square MHA and Cooper Square Committee were involved with in the late 90s, early 2000 was the fight around the Con Ed plant on 14th Street. Con Ed owned a plant in Murray Hill in the 30s that they had found a buyer for the plant for $680 million, but it's a nice neighborhood near the UN. So they proposed to transfer their power capacity to the Con Ed facility on 14th Street. And when the community objected because the Con Ed plant was already a major polluter, they said, well, we're going to use gas, which is a clean fuel compared to oil. But unfortunately, it also generates particulate matters, which is very small bits of whatever, burnt fuel that is a significant cause of asthma. And again, we're talking about the Con Ed plant being located just across the street from the housing projects in a low-income neighborhood. So their profiteering had a racial aspect to it. Ultimately, after several years of struggle, the community was able to make Con Ed back down from their original request. They agreed to convert to completely gas, to build higher stacks so they wouldn't be polluting the surrounding neighborhoods, and to provide additional funds dedicated to clean air. And for that, we're very happy. And again, this was done by way of a coalition. Lower East Side people, Community Board 3, Susan Stetzer in particular, and also the a Lower East Side Coalition, Environmental Coalition, um, the East River Environmental Coalition. One other displacement piece of work that we also did, and again has a racial aspect to it, is the Spura controversy, which is Sewer Park Urban Renewal Area, where 1,850 families, mostly Latino and Black, were displaced, so to make way for new development, which they were promised the right to return. That promise was not kept for over 50 years because Sheldon Silver, the second most powerful man in New York State when he was in the assembly, prevented any low-income housing from being built on the site because the Grand Street co-ops across the street objected to it, okay? They were for many years maintained racially segregated, and yes, Sheldon Silver was a tenant in those co-ops. Eventually, a coalition again, Lower East Side groups, SPARC, Sewer Park Area Redevelopment Coalition, working closely with the Coops Square Committee, was able to reach a compromise, resulting in a 50-50 split. A developer was selected pursuant to an RFP. 50% of the housing would be affordable to families from low to middle income, and 50%, unfortunately, market. But that has created a lot of housing. I believe altogether 1,000 units of affordable housing and 1,000 market, and also economic development by way of businesses. The Essex Street Market was relocated to a brand new facility. So it was a clear win. But the fight continues. Right now we're dealing with the church, the Archdiocese of New York, that's currently disposing of many of its properties for luxury condos. We tried to win Nativity Church to be redeveloped as senior housing for people. We actually offered $18.5 million that we scraped up together, but they didn't go for it. They got double that amount from a condo luxury developer. And even when that's very sad about the church, because they do good work, they do build low-income housing. But again, there's elements of racism. For example, as a way of compromise, they offered us the St. Emmerich site. They're proposing to build low-income housing there. And we're very happy with that. But the St. Emmerich site is also adjacent to the Canet plant. It's a brownfield site. So before anything can be built, it has to be cleaned up. So I'm saying that in the context that the struggle is never over. And environmental issues are very much tied in to racism, and they need to be tied into the issue of displacement, particularly the most vulnerable population, which is communities of color and working class people. I hope I wasn't too verbose.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Valeria.
So yeah, thank you so much. So we're gonna go to our next speaker, Juan from Solar One.
Great, thanks, Claire. Can you hear me? All right,
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan. I am from Solar One, and I'm from the Here Comes Solar program that Clara described earlier in her earlier slides. So I'm actually going to talk today about something called community shared solar. This is a relatively new concept where you can share solar energy systems with your neighbors. So let's get into it. You can go to the next slide. So just a review, I'm here from Solar One, like Clara mentioned in her slides. We're an environmental education nonprofit based out of here in New York City. We do a lot of different programs, but all of our programs have the mission of including all New Yorkers in this conversation to fight against climate change, to be better environmentalists, and to build a more resilient urban community. Within Solar One, we have a workforce training program. We have a park that we manage on 23rd Street and the East River, so not quite Lower East Side, but just north of that. And that park is open. You can check it out whenever. And then we also have a workforce training program where we train New Yorkers in the skills that they need to become solar installers. and other energy efficiency or building management programs. And then the program that I'm here representing is called Solar One. As Clara mentioned, we provide technical assistance to New Yorkers of all kinds, homeowners, community organizations, and now renters looking to access solar energy. And so in the next slide, you'll see that really why we're doing this work. And so solar energy is becoming more and more popular the last few years. The costs have plummeted, since solar panels first came on the market, in a mass scale in the 70s. And even though the costs have plummeted and installations have increased, if you look at where those installations have happened, it's happening inequitably. And so that map below shows the kind of total number of solar energy systems around New York City. Red means there's more solar energy systems. Orange and yellow, a little less, and blue is the least amount. And I don't know if anybody would try to guess, why do you think Staten Island and Queens, Eastern Brooklyn, Long Island have the most installations?
Because they're less dense.
Exactly, yeah, less dense. Any other guesses? Private homes, yep, exactly. Yeah, those are exactly the reasons. There's just a lot more single family homes, one family homes, more home ownership, and also just frankly, just more higher income and more white communities. And so this means that the growth of solar energy is not happening equally. It's happening in some places. So if you look at New York City as a whole, you'll say, wow, solar is really picking up. But then you look at where it's happening and there's not as many systems in Upper Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan, in Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, in the Bronx. It's all happening in the single family higher income areas of the city. And so we wanted to change that. We wanted to address these barriers that prevent people from getting solar energy. And Clara talked about one way we do that. We have the partnership with UHAB that encourages HDFCs to get solar energy. And we provide all the technical assistance, all the information to allow the board to make the decision as to whether or not to install solar. I'm going to talk about another way to access solar energy more individually as an individual Con Edison ratepayer. So in the next slide, I'm introducing the concept of community solar. Community solar, very simply, is just a form of solar energy that allows individual households to share one large solar energy system and reduce their energy bill through credits. A community solar system is also referred to as shared solar or a solar farm. Most places that say solar farm are places that have farms. New York City doesn't have too many. We have a few community farms or community gardens, but in New York City, it's more shared solar or community solar, but it's all the same concept. And this illustration is kind of visually representing the way this works. There's one solar energy system that's installed on a large rooftop. It could be anywhere in the city. It could be a warehouse, it could be an apartment building, it could be a church. And then we basically split it up and allocate different businesses and residents with a portion of that system. And you end up getting credits on your Con Edison bill every month that represent the amount of energy that your share of the system generated. And so in the next slide, I'll provide some more background into community solar. So community solar, it's actually available on a state-by-state basis. So each state has different rules around the availability of community solar. Here in New York, I think around 2015 was when we passed the legislation to allow community solar to take off. And that was really a legislation that said, okay, Con Edison, you need to allow this billing mechanism to split up the benefit of one solar energy system. So it was we had to tell the utilities to start allowing community solar. And then there was a few years where, people were just trying to figure it out and how do we make projects happen. But really as of like 2017, really 2018, you see a lot more projects get off the ground. And now there are over 200 projects either completed or planned in this tri-state area. New York City, it's probably closer to 50 to 100. These projects are owned by all different types of entities. Some are private solar developers. But what really excites me are projects that are owned by a community group or a nonprofit. And I'll get into a little bit of that later. There are a few main type like models of community solar. So again, community solar in the most basic level is sharing a solar energy system. You can actually do community solar within one building. And so if you live in an HDFC, you put solar on your building through UHAB and Solar One's consultation. We could recommend that instead of the solar just reducing the common area, it might be the common area bill. It might be more beneficial to split it up amongst the residents. And that's a form of community solar. I'm going to go deeper into another type of community solar called a subscription, community solar subscription model, because this was what's more common to people that can't access solar on their own roof. So again, there are challenges to installing solar energy on your own home. Solar energy, especially in New York, is a really great investment. There's a lot of good tax incentives and property tax incentives, and it saves you a lot of money. And like Clara mentioned, usually within like 4 to 8 years, you recoup the investment. However, not everyone can get solar on the roof. And so as the next slide states, there are some challenges. Challenge number one is that, that one. Some roofs are just unsuitable for solar. And so after we do the site assessment, we realize, well, you have, a bunch of air conditioners. It's a very narrow roof. Unfortunately, this is not the best roof to fit a solar energy system. A second challenge could be the lack of home ownership. And so a lot of New York City obviously is renters. And as a renter, you have very little to no control to tell your landlord to put solar energy on your roofs. And so you can't access solar energy because of that. And lastly, it's too expensive. It's too much of a capital cost at the time. And so there are different financing options for solar. There are loans available. So I wouldn't say that's a reason not to get solar energy, but it might just not be the time. Or you would also, maybe perhaps the roof is really old and you also have to redo the roof. And you said, maybe now is not the best time and we need to do the boiler right now. So that's another challenge to getting solar up right away. So next slide with community solar addresses a lot of these challenges. So with community solar, there's nothing being installed on your roof. You're signing up to receive a portion of a system somewhere else. So because of this, anyone that pays a Con Edison bill can join, including renters. And so you don't have to be a homeowner. You could be a renter and sign up for a project in the Lower East Side or in Queens or in Brooklyn. There are no sign-up fees for community solar, and you could cancel at any time. With a subscription, you pay a monthly fee, but that's always a percentage of the credit that you get from Con Edison. So if you get a credit of $100 on your Con Ed bill, the fee is going to be a percentage of that. So you basically are splitting the credit with a community solar project. So you're always saving money in that way. The solar energy system is installed somewhere else in New York City. So again, there's nothing going on your rooftop. And then you're also kind of supporting the development of solar energy in New York. And it's guaranteed savings. The amount of savings differs for every customer, but more or less it's about $10-ish, $15 a month. I like to say it's basically like getting one free month of Con Edison bills over the course of the year. And then there's different ownership models. And so, like I said, you know, this could just be a solar company that owns it and is providing you with the subscription. But Solar One has worked with community-based organizations that want to do their own projects and try to keep the benefits as local as possible, or make sure that the benefits are being are being received by very specific community members. And of course, with more solar, you need more people to build it, to design it, to do customer service. And so the more community solar projects that we can build, the more workforce opportunities that there are to make it happen. And so I'm going to run through a couple of examples of community solar projects that we're working on here at Solar One. The first one's called Sunset Park Solar. It's a 685 kilowatt system on the Brooklyn Army Terminal. What that means is that the system fits on that roof. For one family home in, you know, Staten Island, it's typically 5 kilowatts. And so that's a sense of like the scale. All in all, it could support around 130 households and businesses. That's how many people can share this solar energy system. With this project, we wanted to maximize the local neighborhood benefits as much as possible. And so we are working with Uprose, which is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization, and Co-op Power, which is a cooperatively owned solar developer. And basically, we are trying to find as many participants for this project from the local community. There is a mix out. There's some people that are participating from outside Sunset Park, but we're trying to maximize the participation within Sunset Park. And Uprose is really the partner that is at the forefront of communicating with the community regarding what this project is, how it benefits the community, and what it means for the community in the long run. Sunset Park is also a community that is has environmental justice issues and challenges. There was flooding with Sandy there as well. There's also a lot of peaker plants, some dirty energy producing facilities that are located along their waterfront. And so this is part of a comprehensive plan to make the neighborhood greener and more resilient as well. And so it's not just about, you know, putting solar energy up like Cooper Square. There's an entire vision to have the neighborhood be more resilient, and also hoping that this can be an additional tool to combat gentrification, which is another challenge that's happening in Sunset Park right now. And one thing that's interesting about this project is that for the first few years, the ownership of the project is a mix of investors, Co-op Power, that's the cooperative developer, but at around about years 8 or so, Uprose is going to have the option to completely buy the system and own it. And so there's going to have that real like local ownership for the long term of the system. And with Co-op Power, we're also setting up a cooperative, the New York City Community Energy Co-op. And so not only are people going to save money on their energy bill, but they'll join this cooperative, and that'll also be an opportunity to create new energy initiatives in the future that the cooperative decides on. So there's a lot of great, you know, local community decision-making happening. And on top of that, we've also trained 6 members of the local community to work on the solar energy system. Crossing our fingers, it starts sometime in the fall, early winter. But we do have workforce trainees that are ready to help build the system with the installer. The next project I want to highlight is the Community Power Project. So this is a unique project in that we are actually pooling 40 NYCHA buildings across 3 NYCHA campuses, 1 in Upper Manhattan and 2 in Brooklyn. And altogether, we're gonna have 1.2 megawatts of solar, which is enough for about 350, maybe up to 400 households to subscribe to this project. What makes this project unique is the specific focus on the households that we're recruiting to sign up for this project. We are specifically recruiting low and moderate income households in the neighborhoods that are close to the solar energy system. So Upper Manhattan and Central Brooklyn, closer to Canarsie. And through that, we are working with affordable housing providers similar to Cooper Square in those neighborhoods to get the word out about this project. This project is also with Co-op Power, so there's that cooperative aspect of it. And we're also working with community-based organizations, Brooklyn Movement Center, and We Act for Environmental Justice to lead the community engagement and outreach portion. And we're also working with another organization called Green City Force to help recruit NYCHA residents for the workforce training component. This is a bigger project, so we're able to train, excuse me, speaking too much, 25 NYCHA residents. And the installer is committed to hiring about 15 of them for this project, and we're gonna support the other trainees in finding other workforce opportunities. And so I think this is the last, oh no, there's one more slide. And so I just wanted to highlight how, community solar, as a little recap, is a shared solar energy system. So the picture that you're looking at now is actually a community solar system on a warehouse. And you could think about it as the solar panels are being allocated to different households. As a participant or a subscriber to a project, you save money on your Con Edison bills by getting a credit on the bills. And you could help support other initiatives such as workforce training, local community control, and just more solar energy systems in local rooftops. And so Solar One, we're here to help. As we mentioned before, if you're an HDFC and want solar for your own roof, definitely reach out. If you are just wanting to access solar energy and save money for your own unit, community solar is for you. And so please hit us up and we will help match you with a community solar system. Or if you and a group of neighbors, want to come together and say, hey, we're interested in starting our own project, what do we do? We're more than happy to start that process as well. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Clara.
Great, thank you so much, Juan. It's really great to hear about the ways that solar can really be accessible to anyone in the city. So we're gonna move into Q&A, and I'm going to hand it off to Sam from Solar One, who has a few questions for Valerio and Juan, and then we will open it up to the audience. So feel free to start dropping questions in the chat.
Hi, everyone. As Clara said, my name is Sam. I'm working with Solar One as a partnerships and research intern. And thank you all again for joining this webinar. So first, I just want to thank Val and Juan again for your wonderful presentations and all the great work that you both are doing. And to begin, I think it'd be great if you could each restate your current role with your respective organizations, and also I think it would be great to hear from both of you how you got involved in the work that you're doing now. Maybe Juan, if you want to go first, or Val.
Okay. Juan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So yeah, Juan Barra, I am a community solar program manager at Solar One, and I work on our Here Comes Solar program with Jose and Sam. How did I become involved in this work? This goes back to when I was in college. I took a class called Black and Green, and it was about how the environmental movement affects communities of color. And prior to that, I've only thought about the environmental movement as, you know, the image of like the stranded polar bear, and which is important, but it wasn't immediately relevant to me. And, you know, I was thinking about how I grew up, I'm from Jersey, right outside the city in Union City. And, you know, we didn't think about the environment as something that affected us living in, you know, an urban community, mostly a Latino community. And it was just really cool to connect the dots. And the class started with how important like the access and the connection to the land is, because that's something that I think a lot of immigrants share and people of color share. And I know that my mom, even in the kitchen, you know, she has all her little plants and stuff. And, you know, immediately I was like, wow, I can't, I never like thought of the environmental movement as affecting someone that grew up in an urban community, but there are so many ways. And then learning about environmental justice and how urban communities and communities of color have faced the brunt of environmental issues in cities across the United States was something that was super eye-opening to me. So that really stuck with me. And right out of college, I was working in energy, but not in environmental justice. And then I was in Boston and I moved back to New York and I started volunteering for We Act for Environmental Justice. And through We Act and being a volunteer there, I learned about Solar One and the work we do. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm sold. It's been almost 4 years now. And I'm really loving the projects that we're working on. So I'll pass it to Val.
Sure. I was involved, I guess, you know, I showed my age also, in the anti-war and direct resistance movement during the Vietnam War period. And I was involved with that for a number of years until the war started, the immoral war started to wind down. And I was looking for ways to remain socially engaged. And I saw a notice on the Cooper Square Committee's window for an organizer. And I said, let me apply for it, never thinking I could get it because my background was too radical. Instead, it turns out that my background was a selling point for them. They really liked the involvement I had in. I come from a working class family background. My father was a tool and die maker. My mom was a domestic engineer. So I basically transitioned from the anti-war movement to the housing movement. And I remained involved with Cooper Square for many years, except for a period in the late 70s, early 80s, when I went down south to organize in Louisiana with an organization called ACORN, the Association for Community Organization for Reform Now, that no longer exists largely due to Republican machinations to kill the organization. And then I came back to New York. I became director of the Cooper Square Committee again, and subsequently, after being director for a number of years and helping to create the Cooper Square Mutual Housing Association and Cooper Square COT, I took on the position of the executive director of Cooper Square MHA. Subsequent to that, I took on the COT. And the COT now is going through a period of internal growth, and I'm looking for expansion. So I chose to start a new organization, which is the This Land Is Ours COT, and we're focusing not exclusively, but on helping rental HDFCs that are troubled, and also trying to secure decommissioned church properties that are being sold for luxury condos as part of the anti-displacement work. And I'm also working with within the This Land Is Ours with groups in Chelsea and Clinton and the Upper West Side, as well, of course, as the Lower East Side, which is our major base.
Great. Thank you both so much. I think it's so great to hear everyone's story as to how they got to where they are and the evolution of both of your work. I'll move on to just one more question before we open it up to audience questions. Since this is an environmental justice webinar, I think it'd be great to hear specifically how your work in your organizations addresses directly environmental justice, or how your work is informed through this kind of EJ lens. So Juan or Val, whoever would like to go first again.
I can go. So it's a really good question. And I feel like what community solar can offer is, you know, it's a connection between, you know, the slide where it's like, there's some very complex barriers, and community solar provides a lot of solutions to those barriers. And so it is kind of at the intersection of like the environmentalism because it's clean energy, but also affordability because it's so accessible to everyone. And I think that's kind of like the key to solving environmental justice is, you know, providing more access and making sure that whatever tools and solutions we're developing to combat climate change or environmental justice issues are accessible and not just for the rich and not just for a certain population. And so I think community solar definitely addresses the issue of access and also affordability. It needs to be, that's also access. It needs to be accessible. It can't be something that, you know, I have to worry about whether or not I could afford, and it'd be great to do it, but I'm sorry, I got these bills to pay. And so community solar makes it easy because it's, you know, you're not paying out of pocket, you're saving money through it. And I think more generally speaking, the work we do has puts community involvement at the center. And so we try to develop projects like I mentioned in those slides with a bunch of partners. And so Solar One isn't necessarily going out to East Harlem and saying like, hey, there's this new project, would you like to subscribe? We work with WeAct and we say, hey, what's the best way to get this message across? Because it can't be a message that's being presented by a strange entity. It needs to be a message that's presented by a trusted community entity. And with our projects, we're trying to experiment with local control and local ownership. And I think that's a very important aspect too, is how is this something that's not just like, you know, touch and go, and here's, you know, another thing that you could, you know, sign up for. But instead, how is it something that would provide like long-term, long-standing changes and benefits to the local community, whether it's through workforce, whether it's ownership of the actual system or the co-op model. There's different ways to do it, but I think that it's important that it stays within the community in some way.
That's a great answer. Thanks for that, Juan. Val, did you want to add?
Just very briefly, my main, as you can see from my presentation, my main focus has been on anti-displacement work. But amongst the last thing I did when I was director of Cooper Square MHA all the way to 2017 is I worked with HPD and Cooper Square community to enroll most of our buildings to have solar panels installed in practically all the buildings. It took years to basically consummate the deal, but I believe since my departure, it has been done, and the city has pledged us a couple of $1 million to help make it happen. Not merely solar panels, but also improvements, general improvements to the roofs, a heating system, and other building improvements that can be justified from an energy efficient initiative. So I'm very glad that I was part of initiating that.
Great. Thank you, Val. Since we're running a little short on time, I think it'd be a good moment to transition to audience questions. So if anyone has a specific question they'd like to ask to either of our panelists, feel free to unmute yourselves if you feel comfortable.
So, okay, I'll ask my question. I put it in the chat as well. Basically, in our building, we want to replace our hot water heater, and we need to. And so we're looking at, we're an HDFC in Manhattan Valley. And so we were thinking, wow, how great would it be to make it be solar? And so my question is a little bit, does that work? Would that give us enough hot water for our building? It's a 9-unit building. Or is our best bet to go with some other kind of hot water heater and try community solar to get some of our electrical written off that way?
I think I can actually answer this one if you guys don't mind. So there are solar hot water heaters. They're not included in the Co-op's Go Solar campaign just because we focus on photovoltaic panels because they're a better deal economically for most buildings. But the technology is definitely out there if you're interested in pursuing it. Another really good option for domestic hot water is an air-to-water heat pump, which uses electric heat. It's a lot more efficient than a traditional hot water heater. And can help you figure out if it is feasible for your building and how you might want to finance it. So we should definitely talk offline about this as well.
I have a question, and my name is Tito Delgado. Can I ask a question now?
Sure.
Oh, okay, because I'm not very good with the Zoom. I'm an old guy. So first of all, I want to say that all of you were terrific. I mean, I've been in the movement for over 40 years, and I can tell you I learned something today. And I really appreciate you guys doing this. My question is, I'm on board of directors, HDFC on 21st Street and First Avenue. Poor folks, right? And my question is, how do you finance something like this if you got no money? What do you do? How do you move forward on this?
I think it was covered by Juan's presentation and also other people there. You can actually have the equipment installed. I guess you pay a rental fee, and after a number of years, once you have the money, you're able to purchase the equipment and it becomes yours. I don't want to speak out of line, but maybe Juan can fill in on that.
Yeah, I could take that. So there's a few options, like if you want solar on your own roof, there are options, and I think maybe after Jose and Clara could take you through that. There's loans, there's like kind of a lease option, power purchase agreement it's called. If solar is not feasible for the building, I would say community solar is the best solution. This is, you would sign up for a community solar system on your own, like through your own account. And you can encourage your neighbors to sign up too, but they don't have to. And then you're basically, joining a system that's somewhere else in the city. Usually it's a warehouse. And then you're getting the savings kind of remotely to your Con Edison account. So they team up with Con Edison and send the credits through your account. So it's all done remotely. There's nothing that's installed on your own roof. And then it all happens through your Con Edison account. So yes, that's something. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a follow-up question. Now, is this something that for the public area only, or can individual apartments also get this service?
It's either. It's any the billing. It depends on the billing situation. So if everyone pays their own Con Edison bill, and then anyone can sign up. And it doesn't have to be everyone, it could just be you. You could also sign up the common area account as well. There's some buildings that it's all one bill and they would have to do it all together, but it seems like you could do it on your own. Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing this. Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to step in, if that's okay, Tito, several years ago, the Cooper Square Mutual Housing Association signed up 14, I believe, out of 20 of the buildings to community solar provider. And over the course of the next year, they saved thousands of dollars on their common area electric bills. And there have been individuals in the MHA that have also signed up, and other HDFC shareholders that across the city and also in the LES that Clara and I have assisted with the process. But we should connect offline, like in terms of next steps, sending a recent Con Edison bill of yours or for your building. That's a good next step in determining your eligibility. But pretty much almost anybody can participate in this program. And it's only been around, as Juan mentioned, for several years in New York since it was approved by the Public Service Commission. But we're seeing this program only grow, and it's very popular now. I think it's actually even bigger right now in the state of Minnesota, which has like more solar farms. But yeah, we should definitely talk more about this because it's a great way to save on your future electric bills.
Thank you.
We have a question from Beverly, and I think this is a great one because I was actually a bit confused about this when I first started working with Solar One. So this is for Juan. Is what you do with Community Solar and at Solar One something like what Green Mountain Energy does?
No, it's different. And so Green Mountain Energy is what we call an energy service company, or ESCO. Basically, when you sign up to a company like Green Mountain, you're changing the company that's generating your electricity. So you're saying, I don't want Con Edison to generate my electricity. I want to get my electricity from Green Mountain Energy. And then you typically pay two bills or two companies. One is Green Mountain for the energy, and then you're paying Con Edison for the infrastructure, for the meter, the wires, all that stuff. With community solar, you're not changing where you get your energy from. You're basically saying, hey, there's a solar energy system there. I want I want to get credits on my bill from that system. So that's the main difference, is that your actual power is still coming from Con Edison, but as a participant of community solar, and by getting by being a member and a subscriber, you're entitled to the credits that system generates. And so it's more of a kind of financial transaction. You're getting a credit on your Con Edison bill that reflects the energy that the system generated, but you're not saying, I want another service provider for my electricity. It's a little different. I know it's a little like splitting hairs, but with one, you're committing to getting all your energy from one company, Green Mountain in this example. With the other, your energy itself is still coming from Con Edison, but the project you're subscribing to is generating credits, and you are entitled to receive some of those credits. Yep, and ESCOs tend to cost more money in the long run, especially for residential, like Green Mountain. Whereas community solar, it's structured so that you're saving money, even in the long run.
Thanks, Juan. As a last wrap-up question, what kind of legacy, or what are you hoping to achieve in terms of doing this work with community organizing and with environmental justice? What are you hoping that the work that you're doing will kind of bring to the world? And if you also just have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with all of us, that would be great.
Well, in just a few words, I would say that with all the efforts of all the organizing that's taken place in terms of providing affordable housing, we're only able to really provide a fraction of what is truly needed. And I'd like to see a major initiative, which I guess would have to be national initiative. So it depends a lot on what happens at the national level, so that everyone who needs a home will have a home that is affordable. I'd like to have housing be recognized as a human right.
I would too. I just want this to be accessible. I want this to be for everyone, and not just community solar, but solar energy, renewable energy, clean communities, jobs. And it's so interdisciplinary. You know, if you're spending less money on your on your energy bill, maybe you could you have more disposable income, or like it helps with the affordability of your home. And so it's all connected. And I just want to make sure that, now I just want to make sure, I would love to see that whatever the solutions that are being made to provide more clean energy, to fight climate change, are inclusive of everyone, and include everyone. And it's not just something that single family homes in Staten Island get to have. No offense, but I want to see it everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you both for your great answers and for a great Q&A session. And with that, I'll pass it back to Clara.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you so much to Juan and Valerio. It was so great to hear about the work that you guys do. And thank you to Alex from Cooper Square Committee. If you have any more questions, we'll be sending out a follow-up email, and we'd be very happy to hear from any of you about either environmental justice or more specifics about how you can go solar, either through community solar or through on-site solar on your building. So thanks for coming, and I hope you all have a great night.
You too. Good night.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Bye, Alex.
Bye now.